I'd hope you'll allow an old man his indulgences. What I'm about to share isn't just some typical story. It's the slow unfolding of a realization that took me many years to fully see. A mix of experience, hindsight, and more than a little regret. It's personal, and it might not always follow the line you expect it to. I'm happy to say I am a changed man, though I suppose the change came too late to undo the things I've done or reclaim what I have lost. Looking back, I see how deeply I bought into what society told me life should be, what it meant to be a man even, and the expectations that go along with it. Yet it does go deeper than that, as if we're told what success looks like and no other form of success will suffice. We're told what we're supposed to tolerate, provide, but most statistically, sacrifice. And I accepted all of it blindly, without even asking a single question as to whether what I was being told was right. Somewhere along the line, I started to wake up. It wasn't all at once, and it most definitely was not because of some sudden moment of clarity. It came gradually, sometimes extremely painfully, and once I saw the truth of it, I couldn't unsee it. It wasn't always like that. Back when I was younger, I didn't really question things all that much. It wasn't in my nature. To me, life felt open, like anything was possible if you dreamed and worked hard enough and wanted it enough. And that's when I found the first thing I truly loved. I was just a kid. I'd guess 13, and my dad gave me my first dirt bike. From that moment on, I was hooked. Riding along the trails around the farm and spending every waking moment riding when I wasn't towing the line. And yeah, life happened to me as it does for everyone. School, work, doing what was expected, yet never fully explained. There wasn't much time left for chasing what I loved like I wanted to, but I never let go of it completely. It just lay dormant for long stretches of time, and on occasion, when things aligned, I could live it. Riding stayed with me throughout as this form of escape. It was always there, even if I couldn't do it the way I wanted to. The passions of an innocent kid put on hold, buried under responsibility, but never, ever forgotten. Stay with me here. Life has been a journey. If only I hadn't taken those wrong turns along the way. I turned 18 in 1980, and not long after that, I went to finally get my motorcycle license. I'd held off getting it when I was younger. It wasn't because I didn't want it, that's not the case at all, but because life got in the way. I was working hard, helping out at home where I could, and I didn't have the time or money to get it done. Back then, it wasn't like it was today. Things were a lot simpler. Everything was far simpler. But over time, like most things, more rules got added in, and somewhere along the way, the human experience started getting chipped away at, buried under a gigantic mountain of regulation. There was no MSF course required in most states back then, no endless paperwork, no online forms, and these horrendous digital testing systems. You went down to the DMV, took a written test, did a short ride around the parking lot, and that was about it. There were some rules, of course, there had to be, but nothing like the layers of regulation you see now. Before all the safety courses and restrictions came in, you could pretty much figure it out as you went along. So there I was, 18 years old and finally holding my motorcycle license. But the truth of it is, I'd already been riding for 5 years by then, and the licensing was more of an enforced formality. That first bike I got at 13, it wasn't anything grand, just an old dirt bike my dad had fixed up. But to me, it was everything. But even more than that, it felt like a ticket to freedom and an escape from the closing in of a life that already seemed so predetermined. Getting my license didn't feel like the beginning of something. I think that's what I'm trying to say. It felt like picking up where I'd left off. Like I was finally allowed to take that feeling out beyond the edge of the property. But I had to be realistic. Who didn't have to be? I didn't come from money, and nobody was going to pay my way in life. So I got to work not long after. I never went to college, but I landed a job with a logistics outfit. At least, I could pay my way. It was mostly warehouse and distribution to start with. I mean, I was just glad to have something solid. But even from the day I started, it just felt like it was what was expected. I had no passion for the industry, and most guys who worked there didn't. Yet they didn't seem to push back. They accepted it for what it was, but I found that hard. There was talk, even back then, about potential opportunities abroad. A few of the older guys had been sent overseas to run the operations in places like South America and Southeast Asia. It wasn't high-paying like some jobs are, but it was something different. That always stuck in my head. It wasn't necessarily a goal, but it was a possibility and something to dream about and imagine. I still rode when I could, but mainly short rides, local runs, and weekend mornings when the roads were empty. But it wasn't the same anymore. It wasn't because I didn't love it, that never changed. But when I was out riding, I'd be thinking about everything else I should be doing. There were bills, expectations, responsibilities, and I'll say it again, expectations. The more I tried to hold on to what I loved to do, the more I felt like I was out of step with everyone around me. And I started dreaming about the famous rides I'd read about in other parts of the world. I'd read about them and imagine riding them, and it was kind of my little escape. My parents never came out and told me to stop riding. They weren't that direct. But the message was there, just under the surface. My dad had ridden too back in the day, but he stopped when life got serious. That was how he saw it. So I figured I'd do the same. I have one vivid memory that sticks out more than others. I remember one afternoon when I was 23, I'd come home for a Sunday dinner. I'd taken the long way back on the bike, and I was barely through the door when he hit me with it. "When are you going to knock that off and settle down?" my dad asked. Just like that. He didn't say it angrily. He wasn't trying to come across as pushy. He was just trying to tell me, people my age were meant to do something else now. Yet it wasn't like I could look at my dad and see what I could have if I did what he expected. Following such a rigid path hadn't given him anything much to write home about. But I knew it was obvious what came next. And I was the only one holding it up. I never argued with my old man. I did look up to him, and I didn't have the words for it back then, not the right ones. I just nodded and said something about work being busy, which it was. But to me, it wasn't just about the work. It was everything combined, the pressure, but most of all, the constant expectations. By 24, I wasn't talking much about bikes anymore, not at work and most definitely not with my folks. I still rode when I could, but I kept it in the background and still thought about rides I'd love to do. That was the year I met someone who would become my first wife. She didn't ride, but for me, that made it easier. I didn't have to explain what it meant or how long I loved it or what it was about. I just kept that part quiet, and that made things easier. Everyone else seemed to be settling down, doing the supposed grown-up thing, and I guess I figured maybe it was my turn. Maybe that's what being a man meant. Put your head down and get on with it. It's not that I wasn't prepared to do that. That's not the case. It was the way things seemed to already have been decided before they'd yet happened. Like I had no say in the direction I wanted my life to take. After meeting her at 24, everything changed. Even though I couldn't really see it happening at the time. If I think about it though, it really did. It didn't feel like giving anything up. That's definitely not it. It just felt like taking the next logical step on a path that everyone else had to go down. She was good to me in the beginning, as good as you could expect. I felt like she was grounded, stable, and serious about life. We were, on paper, a decent match. On the surface, at least. She wanted someone dependable, which I tried to be, and I wanted someone who wouldn't do what she would end up doing in the future. We got on well enough early on, and I thought that was enough for me. We got married a year later. There was no big proposal or anything like that, just a conversation over dinner that ended with her saying she didn't want to wait forever. It was very matter of fact, and most definitely not romantic. We rented a hall, invited the family and friends, and that was it. I thought I was happy. My mom seemed happy. But how I feel now, when I look back, it was me making decisions that would trap me in a life that I didn't really want. I was prepared to accept things because I thought that that's just what you had to do. We were married, and it should last its course. By the time I was 26, I was working full-time in operations for the logistics company. They moved me into scheduling, then procurement, and I got better at it than I ever thought I would. I didn't love the work, not even a little, but I showed up as you do, put my head down and did what was expected. Promotions came slowly and raises were modest, but at least they came. Overall, the job was steady and it paid for the house, the car, the insurance, the diapers, and the growing stack of bills for things I hated having to pay for, but gladly did for the sake of my family and our futures. We had our first kid when I was 27, a boy. Then 2 years later, we had a girl. And with that, my days stopped belonging to me completely. I must stress that I love my kids more than anything in the world. But anyone who says parenthood is nothing but joy is either lying or forgetting the details completely because it's exhausting. It takes up all the space in your life. And for someone like me, who had already given up so much just to make everything else work, it was the understanding that this was basically it now, and I might as well stop dreaming about doing anything else. Then the years passed, one by one. Years we'll never get back. Days turned into months and months into years and years into over a decade. I worked, then I worked some more, and after that I did even more work. But somewhere in the middle of all that hard work, there was a stretch of time where I finally started to believe it might actually all have been worth it. The mortgage was getting close to being paid off. The debt, aside from the mortgage, was gone, and the kids were growing into decent people. Maybe all this sacrifice was worth it. Maybe if I just kept going and kept pushing, I'd get to a place where I could breathe again. Not escaping exactly. Escape is such a hard word, and I'm referring to it as escaping from expectations and normality, not escaping from life or family. But I did start to think maybe one day I could live on my own terms. There were even a few months where I felt a bit proud of myself, like I'd built something solid from nothing, and I honestly thought the worst was behind us, and I started thinking about giving myself something, a reward for all the hard work, for my 40th birthday. So that's what I did. For my 40th birthday, I gave myself something I hadn't allowed in years. A few weeks to tick off a bucket list ride. I'd thought about this one for years, discussed it with my wife who was supportive, and without thinking too much, I took my unused vacation days and went to South Africa to ride the Sani Pass in the Drakensberg Mountains. I'd read about it more times than I could count. It was a kind of ride that was good for experienced riders. Steep gravel climbs, weather that could change on a dime, and views that didn't even seem real. I felt like this ride would make up for the total lack of rides over the past 15 years. I started from Underberg. I liked the solitude of solo riding, and this was going to be one of those special rides. Perched on the eastern side of the Drakensberg Mountains, the Sani Pass looms like a gateway to some kind of other world. It was only a small stretch of steep gravel, but it was special. Freezing cold when you got up high in elevation, and very tight hairpins along the way. I was doing this on a bike I'd always wanted to ride on, the famous and aptly named Honda Africa Twin, the XRV 750. I still remember all those loose stones rattling off the chassis and how it took me back to the trails at the farm. The Sani Pass is known as having the highest pub in Africa, called the Sani Mountain Lodge, just across the border in Lesotho. At the time, I think it was called something else. I got there around midday and the cold was starting to get to me, and it hurt less though when I got a beer. I was wearing a layer of thermals and leather, and if you're a rider, you will get it. That triumphant pause when you turn off the engine and think about the ride and relax with a beer in hand. I'd just overcome one of motorcycling's true climbs, and the world felt vast and home felt such a long way away. For me, Drakensberg wasn't just about high altitudes. Over the next few days, I rode gravel pistes along the ridgelines, often entering low cloud layers that you'd spring out of and be greeted by the best views ever. The scenery itself was staggering. Tall cliffs that seemed to change colour depending on the light, and the mist would spiral sideways through the valley, and sometimes you'd be riding through the mist and coming out the other side. The Africa Twin was the perfect motorcycle for this terrain, as long as you kept it under control at all times. I want to continue more and talk about how this ride changed me, but I think I've already said enough. It was a life highlight that I will always remember. And then I went home. Coming back from that ride in South Africa, I honestly felt reinvigorated and like maybe things were finally starting to turn around. That ride had done something to me more than just getting on a bike and riding. I came home as a new man with a new lease on life. I was sharper, clearer, and I did feel more grounded. Without sounding overly dramatic, I felt like I could now count down to when I could retire. For a little while, that feeling carried through into my everyday life. I got back into work, and for once it didn't feel like a punishment. The mortgage was almost paid off, the kids were older and more independent, and for the first time in forever, I thought maybe the hard years of work and sacrifice were behind me, and it was now time to start reaping the rewards. But slowly, things at home did start to shift again, yet unfortunately not in the way I was hoping for. The kids were getting through school and that was all good. We were watching the money a little closer just to be safe, and work was just like it always had been. I told myself it was just another one of those lulls. Why should we expect all these lulls as normal? I don't know, but I had to try to explain it to myself in some way. She was becoming different, and we weren't talking as much. Yet I was the happiest I'd been. It was as if she saw a more stress-free, relaxed version of me and she didn't like it. I still went to work and did what was expected of me, but that didn't appear to be enough. Then she starts looking at me differently, if she was looking at me at all. Everything I said seemed to be wrong. I tried to correct myself, even though I didn't know what I did wrong. Yes, that was me being facetious. While she came across as being civil most of the time, I was just walking around when we were together, trying to make sure I didn't upset her. I didn't want her to get into another one of those fits of anger, which seemed to be occurring with a lot more frequency than they had in the past. But I tried to talk to her about it, or ask if she was okay, and she'd just stare at me blankly and say, "I'm fine," and then it was left at that. It definitely didn't seem like she was fine. I wanted to believe her, but I found it hard after this went on for months and months with no reprieve. I started getting thoughts like I had never had before, but I didn't want to admit this to myself because I knew what it would mean if things got worse. One night I came home after finishing work and she wasn't there. No note or message or anything, she'd just gone, and I waited, because there was nothing else I could do. She came back late and said she needed space. That was the new thing, her new buzzword, needing space, and that's all she seemed to say all the time. The kids were at school and she was free to remain at home, so how much space did she think she needed? It went on like that for a few years, just dragging on, but I actually started to look forward to leaving the house in the morning to go to work. Nothing really changed, but it never got better either as much as I tried. I kept going through the motions expected of me, doing what I was supposed to do, thinking maybe things would get better. Then one day, completely out of nowhere, she just said it. I want a divorce. No reason offered, no excuse given, and no explanation. Just like she'd already made up her mind, and there was no point in me even trying to get her to change her mind. I wish I could say I was surprised, or that we sat down and tried to understand what we could do to fix things. But she had already made up her mind. All those years I'd worked hard to provide for my family, pay down the mortgage, which was already paid off by now. What was it all for? I was going to lose so much. But she wanted out. There was nothing that I could do or say that would change that. What followed wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the loss of everything I'd spent my adult life trying to hold together. I'd sacrificed everything, my youth, my energy, my endless optimism and love for life, to do what was expected of me, and this is what I got in return. The house went, most of the savings, all the work, years of holding back the things I really wanted to do so that we could have something stable. All gone, just like that. I lost faith in America when that was allowed to happen. What were the last 2 decades even for? I'm thankful that my kids had left home so they didn't have to go through it. But this didn't feel like it was correct. It felt like I'd been sold a lie and given a false ambition to work towards. And when I did as I was told and what was expected of me, I had it thrown back in my face so violently. I was through with America. I had to continue working. I had nearly nothing left. The same company for over 20 years, and I'd never asked them for anything. But I went to them and said I want to move somewhere else. Otherwise, I'm going to quit. I was expecting to walk out that day and go look for another job, but they said they would see what they could do. As much as I didn't like it, I was reliable, hardworking, and committed, and I suppose they saw value in that. And then, 2 weeks later, I was offered an ops management position in the Dubai branch, so I took it. $10,000 a month as well. I was paid somewhere close to that already, but after taxes and bills, it didn't go as far as you would think. So at the start of 2011, I was on my way to Dubai to start out that chapter, newly invigorated and just looking for something different. I always took my kids and ex-wife on international vacations. I think it's important to see the world, but I'd never been to Dubai before. The work itself was fine, just as it was before, but with added responsibilities. It came with the same pressures, just in a different location. The team was good, and I wasn't completely miserable anymore, and that was the main thing. But to be honest, I felt Dubai was the worst place I'd visited. It felt so superficial and surface level and fake. I was brought up to be modest and hold your cards close to your chest kind of guy. But the level of showmanship and minds bigger than yours in Dubai was definitely not for me. I was living in a great apartment, which I got on top of my salary, and it all looked good on paper. But I'd come home most nights and just be there. I didn't know anyone outside of work, and the thing is, I didn't want to. The social scene felt like one sales pitch, with everyone trying to prove something to someone. And I wanted out after only 3 months. Not back to America, but somewhere else. I spoke to HR and said I'd like another transfer. I knew I'd need to do a full year in Dubai, but I made it clear from then on I didn't want to do more than that. 2 weeks after that year came to an end, I flew to Bangkok to the same position for the office there. Throughout my time in Dubai, I pretended I only earned half of what I actually did. The other half went straight into a bank account I'd opened in Singapore with some help from the company. Even back then, it wasn't easy to open an account as an American. I can only imagine how much harder it is today. But that account became sort of like my vault. Half of everything I earned after taxes, which as an American abroad was more than it should have been, went there, no questions asked. That decision would turn out to be the best I ever made. Thailand. Now that was more like it. I'd taken my family to Japan before, but that was the only place I'd ever been in Asia. I guess you could call Dubai Asia, but it didn't feel like Asia proper. And I really fell on my feet in Thailand. I was paid the same amount that I was in Dubai, with a 5% raise. I suppose I can say that all that hard work I put in earlier in life was starting to pay off, even though I lost everything I worked for before. The Thailand branch was the one for Southeast Asia. They used to have the office in Singapore but moved to Thailand. I'm not sure why they did, but I'm glad they did, because as soon as I was in Bangkok, I started to feel alive again, open to new opportunities, new possibilities, and I was able to completely forget about my previous life. I was ready to live my life now to the fullest. This was at the start of 2012. I was given another great apartment right in the heart of Bangkok, a stone's throw away from the Asok BTS station, and life was good. When I was living in Dubai, I finished work, I would go straight home and wait to go to work the next day. But now I was in Thailand, in Bangkok, I would finish work, go home, get a change of clothes, and I'd be out. In Bangkok, there were so many things you could do. It wasn't like in Dubai, where on the surface they appeared to let people do things, yet they didn't really. It felt like I was finally free to be able to do what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it. And that's all I ever wanted to do until I realized I needed to do what was expected of me instead. I had to have a life that I didn't want, just to get it out of the way. That's what it felt like. Being somewhere where you can live life on your own terms, while doing a job that you're starting to appreciate and be grateful for, it's where everyone deserves to be in life. And the first 6 months of being in Thailand were amazing. I wished I felt like that my whole life. A moment that I really remember about my old life that I still have great memories about was the time I went with my family to Peru. I was having similar feelings. Yes, I wasn't on vacation, I was living a life. It took a long time for me to get there, but I was starting to live. Did I get suckered into the nightlife that was only a short walk away from my apartment? You bet I did. I was enjoying myself and trying to cram in everything that I'd missed over the past decades, but I didn't get carried away. Thailand was the perfect place to reinvent yourself, and I was reinventing myself. More accurately, I was becoming my real self, the person I'd always wanted to be, with dreams and ambitions to take me away from where I came from, as opposed to force me to remain. And after being in Thailand for only 6 months, I met a girl. I was 50, I celebrated my 50th birthday in Thailand, and I met a girl who worked in a hotel. She was 41, had her own life before just like I had, and she was the receptionist. She had 2 kids just like I had, and she had them quite young. Her youngest was 18, and she was working mainly just to help send them to further education. I fell for her hard. I hadn't had a relationship since my marriage broke down. I was too scared to get into that position again for fear things could go wrong. But when I met her, they just seemed right. We dated casually for the first few months. Then things got more serious over the next few. And after 6 months of dating, we took the next step and she moved into my apartment with me. I didn't know much about Thailand, other than the fact that I really liked it. But I was still blind to many of the cultures and traditions that were so different to where I was from. While we were dating, I was enjoying work more than ever. And when she moved in, it did feel like a natural progression. What I was earning in Thailand was a great income for the country, and I was still sending half the money after taxes to my bank account in Singapore. As far as I was concerned, nobody would ever know about that, and how much I earned after I'd sent there, that's how much I told her I earned. It wasn't that I thought I was being dishonest or hiding the truth from her. It was just that I needed an emergency fund, and it needed to keep growing, and I would never take money out of it for anything other than an emergency or retirement. She lived with me for 6 months, and then we decided to get married. She continued working, I continued working, and life was good. I hadn't been anywhere aside from Bangkok. In the whole year, I'd never left the city, not been down to the beach, not been up to the mountains, but the mountains were where I hoped to go one day for a ride. I hadn't done a big ride for a long time. I did rent a bike a few occasions in Dubai over a few weekends, but riding there wasn't fun. I never forgot about my one true passion, and I put it on my bucket list that I had to do the Mae Hong Son loop in northern Thailand. When we decided to get married, after being together for a year, she told me it would be better if she no longer worked. She wasn't earning a lot of money, that was quite apparent. When I found out just how little she was earning, it did seem to make more sense that she could stop and I would be able to support her. What I was left with, even after sending half to Singapore, was still more than 10 times what she earned. So when she brought this up, I said I would be happy to do that. The marriage itself, she was from Isan in a town called Udon Thani. We would need to go there and have a ceremony with the family and the village, as is the case that many foreigners have to do. I'm trying to think about how I can describe the marriage in a way that makes it sound different to how other people describe their marriages in Thailand, but I'm struggling to come up with anything unique. About a month after deciding we would get married, we flew up to Udon and we were met at the airport by someone from her family. They drove us around 30 minutes to the village, and when she told me it was rural and very different to Bangkok, I couldn't believe just how different it actually was. I had thoughts and expectations, but I knew nothing about Thailand, so it was a shock to see how things actually were. She introduced me to her family, her 2 kids were there, and we put together the plans for the ceremony, which would be in a month's time. I would say that I didn't pay anything to the family. It was never even discussed or mentioned, but I paid for the ceremony even though it wasn't really a lot of money. We returned to Bangkok, and a month later we flew back, had the ceremony, an experience I will always remember, and once we'd done that, we registered the marriage and I was now a married man again. I wasn't expecting to ever get married again, but it just felt like the right progress to go down. We spent the next 3 months waiting until I had some time off work, and then we went to Vietnam, a country I'd always wanted to go to. We only spent a week there, and I introduced her to my passion. We got a bike and did a bit of a ride up the coast. The coastal roads in Vietnam were incredible. There's just something about, though, getting back on the bike after all that time, regardless of what bike it was, that connects you to what you had as a kid growing up. I wish that I'd not given it up so easily, because when I was riding the bike and she was on the back, there's nothing I would have rather have been doing, and that's what I always thought my life would have been like. It's never too late. I think that's what I'm trying to say. It's never too late to follow your dreams. We came back from Vietnam with that kind of feeling that things went right for a change. Not everything had been perfect. The bike we rented was a little underpowered and she complained about the heat, or more specifically the sun, but I didn't care. I was on a bike again and seeing a different place, and I had been there with someone who seemed to enjoy the road as much as me. When we got back, I got back into work, and the feelings of being in Thailand and the excitement of this new life I'd found, they started to add together and give me the bigger picture and make me happy. The following year, the savings started to grow while I kept the same lifestyle. I didn't change anything about what I spent. I lived modestly in comparison to the money I was bringing in, even after spending half of it to Singapore. What I had left still went a long way in Thailand. In the first full year of marriage, I put away around $30,000 just from what I had left in my Thai bank account. We talked more seriously now about retirement. It seemed like it was within reach. My wife's village had made a strong impression on me when we went for the wedding, and the more I thought about it, the more I started to like the idea of retiring there. But we weren't quite there yet. I was really enjoying Bangkok, but for retired life, I felt it was going to be too much. Over the course of the next year, we made 3 more trips up to the village. This is when I first started to notice some of her quirks that seemed to be highlighted when we were there. Really weird things like she refused to leave the village on certain days, saying the monks had warned her against travel at certain times. Spirit houses seemed to be very important to her, giving offerings of red Fanta and snacks in the mornings. One event stood out. Her sister was there at the same time as us, together with her new baby, and one night the baby wouldn't stop crying. The only logical explanation for her was that there was a ghost in the house, so the monks came the following day. I remember thinking that if we did end up retiring to the village, I'd probably see a lot more of this. But at the time, I thought it was interesting and amusing, and I didn't care if it made her happy. We did decide to start on the path to retirement, and on the 3rd trip that year, we found a decent-sized plot of land about 10 minutes from the main road, maybe 3 minutes from her parents' house, and it looked perfect for what we wanted. By the time we went back to Bangkok, I was thinking about the land almost every night. I had around $30,000 saved in Thailand by that point, and that was roughly the asking price, and the plot was big, so we bought it. It felt strange buying land in that village, but it did feel right. I knew I couldn't own it legally in my name, so it went into hers, but I wasn't too concerned. Not then, at least. We had a solid thing going on, and I trusted her. And also, it wasn't like we were building right away. The idea was to sit on it for a bit and let the money keep growing, and when the time was right, we'd put a house there. That was the loose plan, and we didn't really have any fixed timelines. 6 months after we bought it, I spent another $15,000 to get the front portion raised. That part of the land dipped a little, and water would collect there in rain season and it would flood. A few months after that, I paid around $10,000 to build a boundary wall and a few thousand more to dig a well. The idea was just to move steadily towards retirement, and things were looking good for that. All of this was done with money I saved in Thailand. I never touched the Singapore account. I want to keep mentioning this because it's important. Thailand was where I lived now, and I was putting down roots, but it was important to have a safety net. A few more years go by and I'd saved around $60,000 more, just in Thailand, and that was what we estimated it would cost to build. Her brother's friend was able to do the work, and we knew we could. Her brother's friend was available to do the work, and for that price we should have the house we wanted. It would be more than enough. That was when I started thinking again about the Mae Hong Son loop. Because we had the money to build the house, I just thought one day, I'm doing it. We paid the first installment on the house and I flew to Chiang Mai to follow the dream. By late 2017, as I neared 57, I knew I was overdue another life-changing ride. The last year had been packed with commitments around the house, the land, the village, but as 2017 ended, I knew we were in the perfect window to take on the loop. I'd rent a bike in Chiang Mai, ride clockwise through Pai and Mae Hong Son, then return through Mae Sariang, finishing off with a bit of a detour to ride up Thailand's tallest mountain, Doi Intanon. I planned to do the loop in 5 to 7 days, build some great memories, have the ride of a lifetime, then return to Bangkok and go and check on the progress of the house. I hopped on a short flight to Chiang Mai. This was to be the starting point and the destination for the loop. Peering out of the window, I watched the land shift from sprawling flatlands into the mountainous terrain of Thailand's north. The first glimpse of those jungle-capped hills and the thought of the adventures that await. I was going to be riding again. It was very exciting. I checked into a hotel where I was going to stay for the night before I'd embark on the loop the following day, and I went to pick up the bike I'd booked. I'd gone for a basic Honda CB500. This was going to be tarmac only, and this bike was going to be perfect for that. I planned to spend the rest of the day riding around the city, seeing some of the local sights, and getting used to the bike. I rode up to Doi Suthep, the mountain that is in plain view from most locations in Chiang Mai city, and if that road was anything to go by, the loop was going to be very memorable. Finally setting off on the loop, the first burst of adrenaline, and 30 minutes contending with the morning commute traffic which starts to thin out the further north you go. It's when you first start to feel like you're on this adventure. The first place I planned to stop was the Airbus A330 that had been turned into a cafe. Pull up in the car park and get a ticket, then go into the aircraft and have a coffee or a tea. It seemed quite popular with local people more than foreign tourists, taking selfies sat in the airplane seats and having a look in the cockpit. It wasn't the highlight of the trip, but I had to go. From there, it's when the ride finally starts. No longer riding north, the road snakes east through the hills. Traditional Thai villages that thin out over the course of the next 10 to 15 kilometres. You ride past ornate temples and old traditional shops and wooden houses, and you eventually reach the first climb up into the mountains where the villages end and you enter the green wonder of the jungle. The ride was starting out as everything I thought it would. What they say about the scenery was true, and when I was climbing up those first hills, I was in my element. And this is where the ride finally begins. The roads double back on themselves, curve after curve, curves that would not be out of place on the world's best racetracks, and the quality of the tarmac beat most of the roads I'd ever ridden on. After an hour or so of this, I reached the Mok Fa waterfall. A wooden path winds over the rocks, spiralling down into a pool. It's amazing just how many other people were riding the loop. Those driving in the opposite direction always nodded their heads as they rode by, and I did the same. There's a camaraderie amongst riders, regardless of where they're from, and this was on display perfectly on the first day's ride. I stopped for another coffee at a little roadside place with views stretching as far as the eye could see. Such incredible beauty, and the road seemed to perfectly blend in with the surroundings. I rode past more temple shrines on the outskirts of a village that seemed to be held in time. Nothing either side for miles. As the road progressed, you would encounter even more remote villages and settlements dotted in the hills. I passed the first roadblock of the ride. This one was the military checkpoint. I lowered my visor, smiled and nodded, and they waved me on the way with a friendly salute. As I'm getting back up to speed, I'm overtaken by a small minivan that I would later learn was a popular form of transport to get from Chiang Mai to Pai. The speed it was going at on those roads. One wrong move and it would be barreling down the mountainside. It really seemed like you were gambling with your life by getting in one of them. As I descended into Pai, there seemed to be never-ending curves all the way down. I caught up to a long train of cars and trucks driving in procession. No way for them to get past the slow-moving vehicles at the front of the queue, but on the bike, I could sail right past when it was safe to do so. Then the road opens up. Instead of thick, dense jungle, there are now farms and signs of human activity the closer you get to Pai. You see more hotels and guest houses and restaurants that cater to foreign tourists. I stopped once more next to the Pai Memorial Bridge and bought a drink from a seller who seemed to have claimed that spot as their own. Then I rolled into Pai, where I was due to spend the next 2 nights. I'd booked a room at a quiet little hotel nestled at the foot of the Pai walking street, wooden chalet-style rooms, ideal for peace, yet also a very short walk to where all the action was taking place. Walking Street seemed to be the heart of the town, with loads of bars, restaurants and cafes, and at night, food stalls and other shops selling the typical tourist tat with a Thai twist. The town was really busy when I got there. High season, yet as well as feeling alive, it did feel like you didn't have to go too far to get some alone time. The hippie side of things wasn't to my taste. Guys walking around barefoot, looking like they hadn't showered for weeks. And while I'd done my research, Pai seemed like quite a strange place. So far away from anything else, yet a hive of activity, the likes you're not going to see in other parts of Thailand. On my first night in Pai, I was eating at a restaurant close by to my hotel, and a group of 4 guys pulled up outside on touring bikes. I introduced myself and complimented them on how great their bikes looked. They were from Penang in Malaysia and had ridden all the way up there just to do the loop. We got talking and they say they planned to ride to some of the highlights of Pai the following day. This was something I also planned to do, and they invited me to go along with them. I jumped at the opportunity, and we agreed to meet the following day. It was going to be a tightly packed day. Pai Canyon, the hot springs and the bamboo bridge. I was happy to have been able to see these sights, and doing it together with these guys was great fun. But I was edging to get back out on the road and complete the next part of the loop, Pai to Mae Hong Son town, which would commence the following day. I bid farewell to my new Malaysian friends and went out for another night in Pai. This time I went for a few drinks in one of the bars on Walking Street before trying some of the street food close by. Pai definitely attracts a wide variety of people, so you may run into all kinds of characters while you're there. I returned to my hotel for an early night, ready to set off early the following morning. I wanted to stop off along the way at some of the famous spots, and while it seemed like the ride could be completed in only 4 hours if I didn't stop, I wanted to make a whole day of it, with the plan to arrive in Mae Hong Son town in the evening. When I was leaving Pai, I was feeling excited to finally get back on the loop. The 2 nights in Pai seemed to fly by, but it also felt like a long time since I arrived. I packed up my things early and loaded everything in the side boxes on the bike and set off around 9 a.m. I'd spoken to my wife that morning to check in and to let her know I was heading off, and we talked again briefly about the house, how things were going, and what the builder had said about the next stage. The plan was to take my time along the way, stopping a few times at famous viewpoints, and maybe one of the caves I'd read about. The air was cool and fresh. Winter in Thailand, especially in the mornings so far up north, was a lot colder than you'd expect. As I eased out of town, I remember thinking how perfect the light looked on the hills in the distance. There was a white Buddha that stood out, which I could see from the town. I thought I should have gone to have a look, but I was already on the way. It felt good to be back on the road again, winding through the endless curves and taking in the mountains, some of which were layered in the soft morning mist, which was just dissipating as I set off. About 45 minutes into the ride, I started to feel a little bit strange. At first, it was just a dull ache behind my eyes, the kind you sometimes get when you haven't slept well or when you've stared at your phone for too long. But I had slept fine, and the ache wasn't going away. It was worse when I glanced from side to side. I tried to ignore it and focus on the ride, but a strange heaviness settled into my arms and legs, as though I was carrying a lot of extra weight. And not long after, I started to feel dizzy. I found that I was gripping the handlebars harder than I needed to, just trying to steady through the curves. This was the first time on the ride that I wished I was on straight roads. I spoke to my wife quickly to say I wasn't feeling well. She was up in the village at the time visiting family, and she just told me to be careful and call her again when I could. I pulled over at the next place I found to buy some water and to catch my breath. For a minute, I thought maybe I was just dehydrated, but this didn't really explain these weird feelings that I was having. When I walked back and stood next to the bike, I started to feel lightheaded and a little unsteady on my feet, and that's when I started to panic a little. My pulse seemed faster than normal, and I was already sweating even though it was still early. I tried to convince myself it would pass if I just took a few minutes to rest, and I got back on the bike and carried on, telling myself to make it to the next village where I could get something to eat and maybe sit down in the shade for a while. But as the road kept twisting up and around the hills, this once-in-a-lifetime ride was starting to feel like the worst place I could be. The nausea started to get worse. Every time I leaned into a turn, which was every few seconds, I felt more and more dizzy and my head was throbbing steadily. After another half hour, I gave up on the idea of stopping at any of the places I planned to stop at. I contemplated returning to Pai as it was closer than continuing to Mae Hong Son, but I pushed on, hoping to start feeling better. I'd been looking forward to this ride for so long, and I'd planned to take a whole day of it, but at the moment all I could think about was reaching Mae Hong Son as quickly as possible. I knew something wasn't right, and the thought of getting stuck halfway, alone and feeling worse, was very unsettling. There are a few villages and settlements between Pai and Mae Hong Son, but they are very sporadic, and the services there aren't great compared to the big towns, so I knew I would have to reach Mae Hong Son at all costs. The last stretch into town felt like it took forever. My arms were so tired it was an effort just to keep the bike balanced at low speed. In Thailand, they've got these little kilometre markings, and I can remember watching these and counting them down. It felt like it was taking an hour to get from one to the other, but it was nothing of the sort. I was trying to focus on these markers to distract myself from the nausea and the pounding in my head, and when I finally pulled into Mae Hong Son, I felt dizzy and tired, unable to move my eyes without immense pain, and I did start to worry. My shirt was soaked through with sweat and my hands were trembling as I removed my helmet and took the essentials out of the side boxes. I walked into my hotel and the security there told me I'd parked my bike in the wrong place and asked me if I could move it. I looked at him with dread and he just gestured for me to go into the hotel as if to say, "You look terrible." I checked in without saying much to the receptionist. I just wanted to lie down. I spoke to my wife again to let her know I'd arrived and I felt pretty rough, and she asked me to keep her posted. She was still in the village and couldn't really do anything, but either way it was good to speak to her. I went straight up to my room, turned on the AC at full whack, and lay down fully clothed on the bed. I didn't even shower, even though I was soaked with sweat. I closed my eyes, hoping that if I could just rest, maybe it would pass by morning. Even though my skin felt hot, I was shivering under the blanket, and every time I shifted, the aching seemed to spread a little deeper. That night was rough. I drifted in and out of sleep, wondering what was going on. I woke up every hour or so, covered in even more sweat. My head felt like it was caught in a vice, and the nausea never fully left. Some time before morning, I realized that this was more than exhaustion or heat. By then, the simplest movements felt like they took all my strength. By 8 a.m., I tried to sit up and see if I felt any better, but my whole body felt drained, like I'd been sick for days instead of just a night. My legs were so weak, I had to steady myself against the wall just to make it to the bathroom. I looked in the mirror and could barely recognize my own reflection. I was so pale, hollow-eyed and drenched in sweat. That's when I knew it would be best to see a doctor. I was still wearing the same clothes that I rode in the night before. The thought of the effort I would have to undertake just to take them off felt insurmountable. I managed to make it down to reception and asked if they could help me get to the hospital because I didn't want to ride the bike. And the hotel staff were so kind, they even drove me to the hospital. I walked in and went to the reception area, and not long after, a nurse came and guided me to a chair where they checked my temperature, blood pressure, as well as my height and weight. The doctor saw me shortly after and ordered some blood tests which were due to take an hour. I sat there in the waiting area, too tired to even look on my phone, just staring at the floor, trying to not let the dizziness overwhelm me. How had I found myself here? When the results came back, the doctor told me I had dengue fever. I'd heard of it before, but I hadn't really understood much about it or how brutal it could be. He told me there was no specific treatment apart from rest, a lot of water and time. He informed me I was very unlucky as dengue is more prevalent in the rainy season, but he indicated I most likely got bitten when I was in Chiang Mai, or maybe back in Bangkok. When I found out what it was, I couldn't help but look on Google, and that filled me with dread. While most people seem to be fine after around a week, for some others it's worse. The doctor just told me to rest and wait it out. If I started to feel worse, I should go back to the hospital. I made it back to my hotel and told my wife, who seemed worried, and she said she would try to do something to help. Do something to help. I didn't know what that meant or what the ramifications of that would be at the time. The next week was one of the hardest parts of the trip. I spent most of it lying in the hotel room. I had to extend my stay there, call the rental company and take the bike for more days as I still planned to complete the ride when I felt able to. I kept the curtains drawn against the sun and I drifted in and out of sleep. The fever would come in waves, but I managed to drink as much water as I could and I had to wait it out. I'd planned to explore the town and see some of the famous sights, maybe ride out to the nearby hot springs, but all of it had to wait. On the few occasions I forced myself to go downstairs to buy bottled water or something to eat, I had to move slowly and sit down every few minutes because I felt faint. After about 5 days, the fever started to ease up. My head still ached and the weakness was still there, but I could feel I was getting better. The worst of it seemed to be passing. Each morning I could tell I had a little more strength, though it was nothing like feeling normal. It took almost a full week before I could walk around without needing to rest. But a few days later I was finally able to sit outside in the late afternoon and have a proper meal, relieved to have most of it behind me. It wasn't the experience I'd planned, and I spent a total of 8 days until I was finally ready to get back on the bike. I hadn't even explored Mae Hong Son town yet. I spoke to my wife every day when I was in the hotel and she remained in the village without saying anything more about her desires to try to help. Now I was finally ready to explore. I still felt a little lightheaded and my legs were weaker than usual, but just being able to stand outside without needing to lean on something was a blessing. I'd missed out on so much of Mae Hong Son, and even though I wasn't quite at full strength yet, I knew I couldn't leave without exploring at least a bit of it. I'd come all this way for the ride, and also for the adventure of seeing this part of Thailand. I wasn't going to let that time in bed be my only memory of Mae Hong Son. I wasn't ready to get back on the bike yet, and I just started slowly, walking around the town. It was different to Pai, and nowhere near as touristy, and the main temple there didn't even seem to be in the same Thai style as the ones I'd seen before. It was close to the Jong Kam Lake, right in the heart of the town, which seemed popular with local people who went for walks in the evenings. I walked around the lake, walked back up the hill in the direction of my hotel to find a restaurant, finally being able to enjoy food again, and the Thai food there was on another level. I hadn't eaten anything proper since I left Pai, but my appetite was finally returning, which made a huge difference. I called it a day, went back to my hotel, hoping to have one more day in Mae Hong Son on the bike before leaving the next day back on the loop. I felt close to 100% the next day as I got on the bike and went to the Sutong Bamboo Bridge, which was about 20 minutes outside of town. It felt great to be on the bike again. The bridge was interesting to see, a bamboo walkway over rice fields with a temple at the end. I went there early in the morning before the sun got too strong, walking across the bridge. Nothing but green fields stretching out on either side. I felt like I finally remembered why I was there, to experience it. The following morning, I woke up. For the first time, it felt like I was normal. Not just better, normal. Finally, my head was clear, my stomach didn't feel unsettled, and I could actually take a deep breath without worrying I'd set off another spell of dizziness. It was like someone had flipped a switch overnight. All those days completely out of it, and now I was back to being me again, and I couldn't wait to get on with the ride. I set off from Mae Hong Son before 9 a.m, another cool and fresh morning. That first stretch felt almost ceremonial. In a way, I suppose it was. It might be an overstatement, but regardless of that, I was going on my way and I was going to finish what I started. I'd planned to make it to Mae Sariang by the evening, but I wasn't going to rush things. After spending so long indoors, I was determined to take my time and stop wherever caught my eye along the way. The first place I pulled over was Pa Bong Hot Springs, maybe 40 minutes out of Mae Hong Son. I'd read about them while I was planning the ride. There were only a couple of other people there, some locals and a few backpackers sitting with their feet in one of the shallow pools. I just walked around, taking it all in, and dipped my hand in the water to check how hot it really was. Then I got back on the bike. The curves were still abundant along this part of the loop, but they were starting to get slightly easier, or maybe it was just because I was okay and able to handle them without feeling like I was going to faint and fall off. A couple of hours later, I stopped off at the viewpoint Mae La Noi, and there were quite a few other riders there taking in the sights. The view was great, right next to the side of the road, rolling hills that seemed to go on forever. And I chatted for a while with some of the other riders there. Mostly they were local Thai people, but I did meet a guy from France who was doing the loop solo as well. He was going in the opposite direction and he also seemed to be in his element. Close by, I stopped for a late lunch, no rush. I could no longer remember what it was like, being stuck in a hotel for over a week. That experience was long behind me, and for that, I was grateful. The place I was most looking forward to visit was the Kun Yuam World War II Museum in the town of Kun Yuam. The town itself seemed to be typical of most of the small towns I'd driven past. A few shops lining the main street and a handful of old wooden buildings with beautiful teak facades. Yet, more modern concrete structures seemed to be replacing the old wooden ones as time went on. It was a mix of old and new. The museum wasn't big. It had some simple exhibits showing what it was like when the Japanese were there. It was cool and quiet inside, and I was glad for the short break from the heat. I spent maybe an hour there, reading the displays, then stopped at a small cafe across the road and got an iced tea. The owner smiled and tried to ask me in broken English where I was going, and I told her, Mae Sariang, then Chiang Mai. I bet she sees lots of riders doing the same ride, and she's seen lots of them throughout her life. I left Kun Yuam about 4 and made it to Mae Sariang just over an hour later. I found a small hotel near the river and paid for a night, and Mae Sariang was always meant to be a short stopover before I headed back to Chiang Mai. After I'd showered and changed into fresh clothes, I walked to find something to eat. I didn't have the energy for much exploring, so I just found a little restaurant close by and ordered some food, and then I went back to my hotel to relax, knowing the ride to Chiang Mai was going to be long. The next morning I decided I wouldn't stop off at Doi Intanon on the way to Chiang Mai, but before I set off I took a moment to look around Mae Sariang one last time, and then I pulled out slowly. The road started out gently, winding along the river, and you could see glimpses of the water through the trees. The trees, when you left the town, were so tall, and although you were still in the jungle, it felt different to earlier parts of the ride. Even after riding for a long time, I still hadn't got tired of that feeling. This was me doing what I loved to do the most, and I was going to enjoy this last leg. About an hour into the ride, I stopped briefly to refuel. There was a little petrol station on the side of the highway. It was nothing more than a manual pump under a tin roof, and the guy had to come and pump the fuel manually into the bike. It was interesting to see, and I tried to say I'm going to Chiang Mai, but he didn't understand. I stopped off along the way when I needed a break, and it was around 4 p.m. when I finally rode back into Chiang Mai. The traffic was busy, nothing like the traffic I'd witnessed along the loop. I pulled into the same parking area in the same hotel I stayed at before I set off and turned off the ignition. I just sat there for a moment, and despite everything and the unexpected illness, the days lost in that hotel room, the fatigue and frustration, I had completed the loop and I had done what I came there to do. After checking in, I went out for dinner, Then I walked back to the hotel. Chiang Mai felt great in a way that was almost overwhelming after the solitude of the loop. The following day, I flew back to Bangkok. Even through it all, it was one of the best experiences of my life. The love of riding was still there, and there could be many more rides in the future, even rides with my wife. It was good seeing her again in Bangkok. She told me about the progress of the house. Not much had been done, it was still in the early stages, but I had to get back into work for a month, and we flew up the weekend after that month came to a close just to see how things were going. The foundations were basically done, and you could start picturing where things were going to be. We returned after another month when the second payment was due, and it was amazing how quickly it was coming together. Retirement here was going to be a dream, and we weren't too far away. My wife went back a few times across the next 3 months. However, I just stayed in Bangkok because work was very busy at the time. But after those 3 months, we went up together where the last payment was due. I couldn't believe how great the house looked. It wasn't too close to any other houses, and honestly, it was just perfect. It was at a stage, and I could imagine what it was like. I felt that during 2019 was when we could finally move there, and I could finally retire. I was investing the money that I sent to Singapore, and this was going to be able to provide me with an income that would be able to live a good life in the village while doing everything that I'd always wanted to do, more rides and occasional trips away. That's when everything came crashing down. The house was close to completion. I was expecting to only have about 6 months of work left, and I was sitting on the balcony of the apartment one evening where I often would eat dinner, looking out at the amazing city of Bangkok. My wife came to see me and said she had something to say. I didn't know what to expect, but she looked quite serious, and I just asked her what was up. She said something that shocked me. It more than shocked me, and it's quite hard to describe the feeling. It was as if, when she said what she said, someone had turned a key in my head that unlocked some painful truths that I'd been overlooking. She borrowed some money against the land back when I was in the hotel with dengue fever. She said she went to the monk to get some advice, and the monk said I was going to be okay, but she was going to be lucky soon. She said her brother was going to pay, gradually, over time, and I shouldn't have known about it. But he wasn't able to pay because things went wrong, and he actually used some of the money to buy a truck. Now this loan had ballooned to $1.3 million, which was closer to $40,000, and if it wasn't paid within the next 3 months, the land, and therefore the house, would be taken. I sat there for a few seconds just letting it sink in, and I asked her to repeat what she said. There was no changing it, and it was exactly what she said. Yet I don't know what she expected me to do. I suppose I did. She expected me to pay off this loan, and although I could afford it, it would have to come out of my retirement savings, and the idea of having to lose that money for something I'd already bought because my wife was deceitful, I didn't know what to do. I just told her I'm going out, I'll come back later, and I went out for some few drinks and to think about things. Her superstitions, her quirks, had led to this, and I didn't know if I could ever look at her in the same way. How could I look at her in the same way after she did something like that? After everything I'd been through in my life, the ups and the downs, the thoughts of finally being happy with my wife, retirement coming up soon with the house to live in, which would be more than enough. While I was thinking about all that, now this happened, and I wasn't prepared to overlook something like that. It was too much, it was too far removed from anything that was normal to me, and I didn't think about her in the same way anymore. How could I? When I returned to the apartment, she was up waiting for me. She ran over when the door opened and said she was sorry, she wouldn't do it again. But I just looked at her like, the fact that you did it without telling me, based on the advice of a monk, and now your brother is driving around in a truck, and you expect me to pay for that. I'm sorry, but there are 2 choices that I'm going to give you. Either you pay the money back yourself, or there is no chance that we will be able to remain together. I told her that I trusted her, and now that she did that, there's no way I can bail her out. I told her she needed to sort it out herself with her brother. She then said I can't ask my brother to sell his truck because he needs to use it for work. I think that was all I needed to hear. I just went to bed and went to work the next day just to see what she would do. She was there when I got back from work, And I kept having to tell her that I'm not giving you that money to pay off the loan. The house is gone. It's not about affordability, it's about trust. And if she was prepared to do that, what else would she be prepared to do? That's the sad thing in a way, because we got on very well together. Every other aspect of our life didn't have these problems, but that was one step too far for me. And when she had fully understood I wasn't going to pay, and that she was going to lose the land and the house, she started to blame me. So we didn't last very long after that, unfortunately. I wasn't heartbroken in the way I was when my first marriage broke down. I was upset that I lost the money, but thankful that I'd always prepared for an emergency. I completed another 6 months in the job and then I retired. No wife. I don't know what she's doing today, and after that I don't really care. But I retired to a country close by to Thailand. Not Thailand. And I got there just before COVID closed things down. I couldn't believe something like that could happen, but it did. And I hope you will think my story worthy. It's a beginning to end with some life highlights, some painful truths and some deep understandings. And I've had a blast writing it. I hope also it goes some way to describe why so many guys come to Thailand and do the things they do. It's not in many cases because of stupidity or desperation. It's just a desire to do something different, to remove themselves away from everything that went wrong in their former lives. I was lucky because I was able to work there. Most people don't have that opportunity, but Thailand was meant to be where I would retire with my second wife. But when the key was turned in my head, there was no unseeing the things that I could see, and some things that happened were just unacceptable. Regardless if it meant losing money, and regardless of everything, what she did was not acceptable. It was downright cruel, and I wasn't going to put up with it. And I would say that to anybody else. If you want to take anything from anything that I've said in this story is, if you start out life with a dream and an ambition, try to at least follow it to some degree. If you continue along a path predetermined by somebody else for you, and things go wrong 20 years down the line like they did for me, you'll be nothing more than regret. I am in a good place now, but it's taken a long time, and things I wish I'd known before.